This is Ian. I've been an independent publisher for more than 10 years, and we're going to be talking about two books today. Basically, the covers and some of the other kind of commercial choices that the publisher has to make when they're publishing a book and they're releasing it to the world. So the first book is this one, bestseller, Susanna Clarke, Jonathan Strange, and Mr. Norrell. It says New York Times bestseller at the top there. So this was originally published, I think, in the early 2000s, like 2004, 2005, but this edition was a reprint from either last year or this year, so 20 years later about. This book is also, it's an award-winning fantasy novel. It's from a much earlier era. The original book was printed in the early 80s. This edition is from about 15 or 20 years ago, and you can see that it looks a bit different. So this one has a cover image, a very striking image of the main character. There's also some text describing it, but you can see it's also white text on a black background. So this was printed out in a factory somewhere about 15 or 20 years ago, whereas this came out of the printing press maybe within the past 12 months or so. And I purchased this one in a bookstore. This one, I think I probably purchased it on Amazon a long time ago. So when you look at these two covers, what are some of the similarities and what are some of the differences? Well, I've already talked to you about some of the similarities, white text on a black background. The difference is there's only one illustration here, and there's a much more detailed painting here. It's a really special painting. I don't know if this was commissioned cover art or how this worked out, but this is quite different. But you can tell that this book, this edition, which was, let's say that it was printed around 2005, 2006, this was made for a different era of publishing than this one. This particular book, I can tell right away that this was made for the modern era of selling books online. And I know this because if you shrink this book to small size, and when I say shrink it, I'm just saying about the cover image, and you do that every time you go to Amazon. You're not looking at a full, I don't know what this, 9 inches by 6 inches cover. You're looking at a tiny thumbnail about that big. You'll be very clearly able to see the title of the book, the author, and maybe even the New York Times bestseller. It's high contrast text. When you shrink it, the letters are large, the words are large. You can see exactly what this is, and that is really an important thing when you're competing against thousands of other books by both known and unknown authors. You want your book to stand out, and this will stand out. The other very interesting choice about the text here, in addition to the white on black and it's very large text, you can see it's kind of like it's almost handwritten or from an old printing press that was kind of running a little bit. It's kind of like a Victorian style or maybe even earlier than that. And to tell you the truth, this book is set in an era about 200 years ago. So the font choice and the way that it's set up, it actually makes it look like it's from another era. And this is an important way to convey a kind of feeling. Will let the reader know what they're getting into if they decide to learn more about this particular book, which is a fantasy, falls into the, I guess, historical fantasy field. So those are the choices that they made. This image here, if you're not really clear what it is, it's a raven flying. That has some meaning in the book as well. You see this a lot with basically any book that is on the New York Times bestseller list. It will get this type of treatment nowadays. And let me show you another example. This is a Stephen King novel, New York Times bestselling author. So that goes right at the top. This is a mark of quality. It's a mark of validation. Other people like the book. So you'll see when a book does qualify in this way, it's often put on a reprint of the book or even on a new edition. So if this person was a best-selling author before, they can still put this on the title of the book, on the top of the book, even if it's a completely new book, because they've earned that. So back to these two books. I've already talked about this one. Let's talk about this Gene Wolfe book. And what's interesting to me, first, is the image was shrunk to a smaller size. It's not taking up the whole page or most of the cover. They didn't try to do anything like blow this up to full size and then have like kind of an inset text right here. They decided to shrink it, and then they have Sword and Citadel, Gene Wolfe, that's the author's name, and then it mentions it's the second half of the Book of the New Sun, and then there's some text down here It mentions the New York Times Book Review, an endorsement there, Nebula, and World Fantasy Award-winning tetralogy. So these are all legitimate things that are on the cover. They tried to squeeze a lot in there in addition to having this very striking image. I can tell this from an earlier era for another reason, for a couple reasons. One is that when you shrink the book, it's still kind of hard to see some of this information. You can see Sword and Citadel, but Gene Wolfe, it's kind of running into these other elements that are kind of behind the text there. The image is, of course, it's striking, and you may be able to see what it is. Certainly, I'd want to zoom in to see more information about that, but all this stuff is just washing out. And what happens when you have a book where, there's other things you want to put on the front, nowadays, what happens is all that information gets put on the inside, like in the endorsements that get on the first couple of pages, or it gets put on the back. And indeed, you can see that this is very, very full list of endorsements, and then there's a description here, and then the other information as well. But they don't try to put too much information on the front because they know that this will be shrunk to thumbnail size, and they just want to really let potential readers concentrate on the most important elements. The title of the book, author's name, New York Times bestseller. Everything else is really quite secondary. They want to make it easy for people to see what they're getting into. And then if they want to learn more, they can either dig into the metadata that's online, or if they're picking this up in a bookstore, as I did, I looked at the back of the book to see some more information. And then, the other thing is, what does the spine look like? You can see it's quite easy to read. It's such a thick book, and the same type of treatment. And for the spine for this one, author, title, name of the publisher at the bottom, the imprint that's there. Anyways, I hope this is useful. I like to share my thoughts and observations about selling on Amazon and being an independent publisher and working in this kind of remarkably transformative field that is publishing and online media. But if you have any comments, please leave them below. More information on how to get a hold of me can be found in the bio.